Hello, hello, and welcome to all of you beautiful souls tuning in today to the Heart of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Amana, and I'm so happy you're here. This is a space where we remember what it means to be wild women walking upon this earth. This is an opportunity for us to practice using our voices and the ancient ritual of storytelling. We share our stories and honor how they inevitably shift and change over time and depending on who we're talking to. I hope that you receive wisdom as well as deep heart and soul connections as you soak in these stories and remember that you are not alone. Today is Sunday, October 23rd, where I am in the world. It's in the morning, a little after the 10 o'clock hour, 2022. I am in my soul sister's living room here in the countryside in Eastern Washington. I just had pumpkin pancakes with her and my littles for breakfast, and now she took my littles to the pumpkin patch so that I could sit here and have this conversation with Emily. I have Emily Carson here from across the world. I met her through Kimberly Ann Johnson's Year of the Jaguar experience that we're both a part of, and we've gotten to be meeting in the group setting and sometimes small groups over the last year. And a little while ago, I did a mediumship reading for Emily, which I felt like kind of took us a layer deeper, and also prompted me to look at her website a little more. And I just loved her energy in that experience with her and her offerings to the world, and wanted to invite her here to this space and to have these conversations, and to learn more about how she supports women across the world through acupuncture, craniosacral therapy, birth story listening, and somatic centered postpartum education. So, Emily, I would love to invite you to take a moment and tell people where you are in the world, a little bit about yourself, and whatever else you feel called to start with today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Um, yeah, it's a real pleasure to be with you for this hour
Mm.
and to be spending some time exploring story in the realm of birth. Um, so yes, as you said, I'm rooted in Oxford, and my work revolving around stories has really sort of taken root more as I've come into motherhood, which was 6 years ago now. And stories weave themselves into my work, both as a birth story listener and also as a space holder for the home birth group. So I hold a home birth group, co-facilitate a home birth group here in Oxford with a dear friend and colleague, Laura Janssen.
Mm.
And the group actually completely centers around stories. And so story has found me both in the way of listening, not just listening in birth story sessions, but also listening in my clinical work with my clients. So each and every person that comes has a story to tell with their body, with their words, with the stories that they've learned about their own bodies. And so when I really thought about us talking about stories, I realized actually stories are ever present in our lives as humans. We're constantly sharing stories. And in this particular kind of context of birth, story feels very significant. Um, so it feels like a pleasure to be here and
Mm.
exploring that with you together.
Yeah. Thank you. Um, do you remember like the first stories or sort of narrative or thread that you remember hearing yourself about birth?
I was thinking about this earlier today, thinking what were the stories that I was told about birth? When I think back to being a child and thinking about birth, I remember being very clear. I must have been 8 or 9, that I wouldn't give birth, that I would adopt my children because I was afraid.
Mm,
And I have no knowing as to how that story found me, and never thought much of it until I started working with a wonderful cranial practitioner here in Oxford called Emma. Enabled a a tissue, really a kind of body rooted inquiry into how my own birth was held in my tissues
mm,
through craniosacral work. So, through understanding some of the patterns that were present through my own system, how my own birth story was held in my body. I was born by forceps, um, and and brought into the world before I was ready.
oh, wow.
And so there was some really useful unpicking for me in that experience with her. That's in some ways ongoing. There's always a reference in some way. It might be working more specifically with the tissues around the skull and what the skull has to say about the early memory of forceps, or how the fascial lines through the body has a connection through those pulls and forces through the skull, and how that shows itself through particular planes in my physical body. Or it might be more through emotional patterns or relational patterns. And it was through that work that, and also delving into more deeply cranial work around embryological development, which
Mm,
was something that I really loved doing. Beyond my cranial training, I then delved into what it is to work with the realm of embryological development as you're working with touch with somebody. What
oh,
is it to bring that into your field? And it was after that 5 day um, embryological work that I fell pregnant.
wow.
And it
Wow.
was a complete surprise. It wasn't an attempt at conceiving. It was um, it was a complete happening with my partner at the time of 10 years. But it was as though that all of these experiences today had opened my heart and my tissues and my womb in some way to
Mhm,
um, being ready to hold a child in my body. And it hadn't been conscious in my adult life that I was afraid. But when I fell pregnant, I thought, wow, there's it seems quite interesting that coincides with this timing, with the other things taking place and unfolding
mhm,
in life. So yes, that in some way is my coming into um, understanding story is through my own tissues. And and then there was a more conscious unpicking of understanding and how I've come to understand birth during pregnancy. There was a more conscious sense of the stories that I carry while I was pregnant. Cultural stories, social stories, stories around remaining resilient, remaining strong, remaining productive, and being pregnant. And some of those stories I got to actively unpick during pregnancy, and other stories I was less aware of during
And
pregnancy.
for those that might not know, like what does that look, or can you describe the like unpicking of stories and what that experience was like for you?
Mm. Well, I think one of the stories was being good. I think one of the stories was in pregnancy, it's important to be perceived as responsible in this new role as a mother. And so in the UK, the structure of care, if you're having the National Health Service healthcare, is that you get given a bookings appointment, which is your very first appointment with a midwife.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's at around your maybe like 9 to 10 week point. And I sat in my bookings appointment, and the midwife was asking lots of questions, a number of which sort of are kind of safeguarding checks, like making sure that you're not in a domestic violence situation, or checking in with you about your mental health. So it's really interesting, already you're in this environment where things are being preventatively sort of flagged up.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being asked to go and give a urine sample, and going and peeing in a cup, bringing it back, sitting in the room and thinking, there's something that doesn't quite feel like really fully good about this. I'm not sure what it is. And that wasn't even a conscious thought, but it was a felt sense.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the kind of appointment, the midwife said, where are you planning to give birth? And I was like, well, at home. But, it's kind of time. There's some time until that point. And she said, oh, brilliant. I really, really, really support home birth. And I said, well, how many home births have you attended? And she said 6. And I thought, okay, I really want to know that who will attend me knows birth and knows home birth really well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I then went on a very clear journey towards finding somebody who would be with me at home that I knew. Because when you give birth here, you get a team of community midwives and you don't know who's going to attend you. So it felt very clear to me that I needed someone that I knew. And I found this person, a wonderful independent midwife called Elaine, who did my prenatal care. And I then had an appointment with her, and it wasn't until this appointment that I realized that I was unpicking this story of being a responsible mother.
Mm.
And we had the appointment at her home, and we sat down, and she said, so these are some of the things that I can offer you, and you get to choose what you do and do not wish to do. One of those things is giving me a urine sample. So if
Mm.
that's something you want to do, you can do that today. And if it's not something you want to do, we can talk about it. You maybe can do it next time. And just being opened up to that choice made me realize that I was in a position of unpicking this story of having to be responsible and choosing to do things in order to appear or be responsible or be good as a new mother or someone coming into motherhood. and really being given an opportunity, kind of co-creating this opportunity for
Mhm.
myself, where I then got to choose and got to choose what was right for me and what actually felt like responsibility for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such an important like thread to bring forth. I feel like as women, we're so taught to be, the good girl from a young age and to not stir the pot and to do as we're told. Um, and I've really in my, 30s really realized um how that then just shifts and translates right into like you're saying into motherhood and being the good mother and also within the medical system of being the good patient and how the system can label us as like irresponsible or not good if we're making choices that are outside of their like norm. And I love that you brought attention to this, like you said, a co-creation of an experience um where you got to choose what felt right to you, not making a choice based on other people's expectations of you, which sounds like, was um I know I myself have made choices based on other wanting the way I wanted other people to perceive me in a medical setting or something like that. So thank you for, yeah, bringing that to the forefront.
I think it makes me think about the um, please and appease the fawning state,
Hmm. Yes.
and how in situations where there's potentially a power structure and somebody's there and you're in that situation and you're pregnant,
Hmm.
that you're invested, potentially more so at other times of life, to prioritize belonging or prioritize getting along in order to stay safe in that situation, in
Hmm.
order to not rock the boat, in order to not cause dissonance. And this is something that I hear repeatedly through client stories, through birth stories. And yet, there's a real validity to that nervous system response because it's a survival response and it's a very valid one.
Hmm.
And, you and I have been exploring this idea of, what is a healthy aggression response? What is a healthy fight response?
Hmm.
And I also am curious about what does that look like in pregnancy when you may feel more vulnerable, or you may feel there's a very different state at play in
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, and I feel a lot of women feel like they can feel more attuned sometimes in pregnancy and then also more vulnerable. And there's the like aspect of sometimes care providers um almost weaponizing the safety or well-being of the child as a way of getting a woman to do a test or whatever it may be that they um don't fully want to do. Or, I know we've talked about the having that our words might say we might say yes with our words, but our body is saying no. And that like embodied full yes compared to a full no or a partial and um matching our full being to the yes or the no. Um, hmm, yeah.
Yes, I'm conscious that there's the potential for us to adventure into or adventure out of the realm of storytelling and into the realm of in some ways the nervous system. But I also think our nervous system holds historical story, and that our our tissues are holding story. And so those moments are such a, you know, these moments where we come into interface with somebody where there's potential for us to appease them in order to keep the situation okay. That's what I'm referencing.
Mm-hmm.
Those moments are such an accumulation of our attachment story, of our relational stories, of our survival predispositions. Um, and in some ways, there's really, I think, just opportunity to notice, you know, what is it that is taking place for me in these situations?
Mm-hmm.
Where is it that I seem to find myself defaulting? And what is the story that I'm currently writing in this chapter with caregivers? What is the interface that I'm choosing? What is the interface I seem to be having? What is the interface that I would like to be writing?
Yes, yes. Um, how did that continue for you in your pregnancy? And did you always know that you wanted to birth at home? Described your birth as a forceps birth. Was that in a hospital or
Mm.
yeah, how did you choose home or did you just know or what was that like?
So yeah, so my the way I was born, when my mum gave birth, that was a forceps delivery. So I was born in the hospital, um, and I think it was just really clear, Amana. I think I had had dear friends that had chosen home birth and dear friends that had chosen hospital birth, and I think there was just clarity for me. This baby will be born at home, and you know, as a practitioner that was working with people around their choices in pregnancy and birth, you know, prior to the point, my own point of conceiving, there was just an innate sense of this is where I need to be,
Mm-hmm.
and finding this wonderful midwife was really the support system that I needed. It was very clear to me that I needed somebody to be by my side. And I did continue to choose, I did choose to have um, I did choose to have scans. And I had, in the UK, they offer you a 12-week and a 20-week scan. And then you're kind of on your own then, and you kind of do your thing. And at the 20-week scan, they found that my placenta was low lying.
Mm-hmm.
And the sonographer said, your placenta's low lying. I'm going to need to have to verify that with a vaginal. So that it's usually an abdominal ultrasound.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, I'm going to have to verify that with a vaginal ultrasound. I was like, well, you can clearly see it's, I mean, I can see, and I'm not a sonographer, I can see that it's like here, and the os, which is the cervical opening, is here.
Uh-huh.
I said I'm gonna decline that vaginal scan. Thank you very much. And and this was really kind of my initiation of exploring my healthy aggression in.
Hmm. Yeah, was that a challenge for you in that moment, or did it feel very clear to you that that was?
It felt so. What's interesting is that when you're being scanned, you're on your back,
Hmm.
and lying on your back is, if we think about animals, animals do not choose to lie on their backs when they're sussing a territory out, when they are in the throes of being in relationship with another animal they don't know yet.
Hmm.
It takes some for an animal to lie on its back and expose its belly.
Yeah.
So that we're just invited to lie on our backs, it's a thing. So, yes, when I was lying on my back during the scan, I was definitely not in clear connection or capacity for no.
Hmm.
It's a big enough room that I was able to have my own space.
Hmm.
And she was over the other side of the room. And it was very easy for me to be able to say, that's not something I want to do right now.
Hmm.
And she said, if you don't do this right now, I'm going to have to put that you've got a placenta previa on your notes, which what that does is it then flags a whole cascade of stuff. And and I said, well, that's just kind of coercion because it's not true. But that's not medically what we're seeing. We're not seeing
Yeah.
previa, so please don't put previa on my notes. And she said, because you've declined the vaginal scan,
Ah,
that's what I'm going to have to put. So it was a really interesting illustration for me of the coercion um, that is is widespread in medical care and obstetric and gynecological care.
mhm,
And yet I felt really okay to stand in my clarity and say, no, thank you. Um, and knowing that I could decline any appointments or whatever. So I chose to go back for a further scan at 30 something weeks, and my placenta had moved. Um, and and I actually asked my midwife to come with me so that I would have someone who I just felt good with to be in the room with me, and that felt like an important reframing of the scan process. But
mhm.
that felt like an opportunity to again make a choice. I could either go in that on my own and face potentially a dissonance, or I could have someone by my side while I go through. I didn't know what was going to come up in that scan.
Yeah,
And so having someone by my side felt like a useful reframing of it's again another storytelling of it's okay to have and ask for support and have someone with you.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, I feel like a birth story is just medicine, such medicine. Um I grew up super obsessed with birth and like loving, I think babies, the magic of babies brought me to then like studying and listening to stories and watching stories and documentaries and everything that I could about birth. And then into like, the last few years when podcasts became such a thing. And I feel like there's just been so much access to birth story medicine, which has been like so wonderful for me. Even though I started attending births like over a decade ago as a birth assistant to midwives, I just um even though I'd like had that deep experience with birth, I it wasn't until like after I had given birth to my son, almost 6 years ago now, that I like heard some women's stories about intentional free births. Like, and it was so interesting to me to realize that, like, even though I was like in the birth world and like, and even my grandmother had an unintentional unassisted birth of my mother, that I still, it hadn't like entered my realm of like an okay choice or possibility that a woman could make. And when I first learned about it, it was um like I heard some positive stories and then also heard people like villainizing women who were making that choice to birth outside of the system and calling them like bad women or bad girls or that sort of narrative. And it's been so like expansive for me and healing to have this awareness of just like the spectrum of choices and to lean into supporting my own self in the choices that feel good and right to me at different, moments and times and situationally, and also other women to make the choices that, feel like that full embodied yes or no in their experience in birth, um, in death, within the medical system, just like you said, this like storytelling and I'm just really grateful for the women who have shared their stories and opened up the knowing or the just that possibility and that we can be good mothers and good humans making all sorts of different choices.
Mm.
I wonder for you, like what brought you into the birth story sharing or home birth group, and how has that like story medicine shown up for you and for your community, and how do you see it shifting and changing the women around you or yourself?
So in 2020, I was kind of reframing my work because of what was going on in the world.
Mhm.
And I'd gone from, I was working in hands on in clinic with people as a acupuncturist, as a craniosacral therapist. Um, and I then started to see some of my clients online, and we were doing online um, kind of more somatic kind of tracking work. And it was also a time where the birth systems here, the maternity systems, were really strained. And I was had also taken on in 2019 the running of the home birth group, which had been alive in Oxford for many, many years.
Mhm.
And the wonderful woman who looked after the group um, until until we looked after it had been like really nurtured it for for many years. And so I attended that group when I was pregnant, and it got to that point where she was ready to hand the group over, and I said I would love to caretake the group for however long. And so that was kind of taking place, and then was really drawn to working with Pam England. So the birth story medicine training I did with Pam England and Danit Sur Amog. And actually my I was Danny was my teacher for the birth story medicine, and the birth story medicine work really, because I'd been listening to birth stories for a good decade, and working with people post birth. But it wasn't until having my own baby and then receiving clients and listening to stories that the kind of matrix of relating to stories started to change.
Mhm.
And then delving into the birth story medicine work, and at the same time holding the home birth group, it felt like just the layers of understanding of why stories are so significant for us, and particularly, I mean, stories in general, but particularly holding and nurturing birth stories and allowing them and holding spaces where they can be told and received. Um, and I think for me, the birth story medicine and birth story listening work really is about holding space the stories in a way that gives them that is holds space with reverence for these stories, and isn't just listening to someone's birth story to assess how long certain phases were, or for their physiology, or whether they experienced trauma, or pathologizing their birth. So until that point, I was listening to it from much more of a Chinese medicine perspective, or from a cranial structural perspective. Um, and the cranial structural perspective also has a tissue listening perspective for sure. But the birth story listening for me is a real weave between both the birth story medicine work and cranial work. Is really about listening both in a somatic way to someone's story. And it's a really beautiful process. It's about listening to someone's story and offering a space for them to come into connection with their story in a different way. So it's inviting the story to be told in a particular way and identifying very specific parts of their story that need to be held. So when I mean a part, I mean like a moment, like a very fleeting moment that feels like it really represents or captures the essence of the experience, that's still stuck, or that's quite not quite felt like it's been able to complete somehow.
Mhm.
um, and looking at all of the threads that feed into that moment. And it's not a like blame finding process. It's very much like a holding with care process, in order that when that place is held, that place of difficulty or wounding is held with care, because ultimately you're never going to change someone's story. The story will never change, but the
Mm.
way we relate to it can, and the way we can be with our story can change. And so it's offering time with that moment in a way that then not deliberately attempts to find medicine, but holding it in a way that enables change. So it's a really beautiful practice. And I came to it both for my client work, but also for the community work that I do with birth story listening,
Mhm.
because I was feeling like this is big territory to enter into, to hold a space for people I don't know, for community, for people that are much wider, coming to listen to birth stories. I don't know their history with birth. I don't know um, what people are bringing into the space, and how do you hold space and give reverence to someone's birth story. So it was both kind of for 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 layered reasons that I was really drawn to the birth story medicine work.
Mhm. Yeah, I find it's been interesting to like witness my own journey with just sharing my stories over time, and the way that the way that I told my first birth story like 8 years ago is so different than how I share it now, the emotions are different. Some of the details that feel um like I want to share also seem to shift and change and also depend on like who I'm speaking to and um even just like my own mood in that moment, you know? But I love the way that you describe the opportunity of the type of birth story listening that you have been doing of just so intentionally having awareness of those um the like threads like you said that come together and where there could be like a almost like a stuck point where excuse me where then allowing space and reverence for that can allow almost like a moving through that point. Is that am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and I think also I think it's important to say that the way that I'm working with it is very integrated with the cranial work that I do. And so and and nervous system work. So when, for example, if someone experienced um, a moment in their birth where excuse me, where they came into a freeze, um, and they felt very alone. Coming out the other side and sharing their birth story in a space that's where someone's very present with you,
Mhm.
potentially sometimes even with contact, and tracking their body as they're doing that, and tracking the freeze that's in the room with you, and being alongside them while they're speaking and while the freeze is present in the space, that you're offering already on a somatic level a reframing for them because they're not alone, that
Yeah.
someone is alongside them in that moment where their system went through an experience where they felt very alone.
Mhm.
And so, and also the experience of being able to track a freeze response can be reparative in and of itself because in a different time and space, in a completely different time reference, so beyond the point where the original freeze took place.
Yeah.
So I guess there are layers to it. Um, but the way that Pam England talks about the birth story medicine work is that yes, there's an opportunity also to understand that, um, for example, if somebody comes away feeling a certain thing about, what their birth story or birth meant about them, that there's an understanding that in there somewhere that it can be medicinal for us. That birth is this incredibly profound, the most profound physiological experience that a body will ever undergo. And in that experience, that's a strong experience for us to meet in our lives. We come up against a death of kind. We come up against the potential for death. It's a huge physiological experience. And
Mhm.
in that, there'll be there'll be a resonance in our system. It will highlight things in our system that life, the, the way that we interact with life in this scenario. And in certain themes being highlighted in birth, there's an opportunity for us to meet them or work with them in ways that have the potential to be medicinal.
Mhm.
Um, so that's how I've understood Pam's work to and how Pam's work has supported me and my clients in our work together through birth stories.
Yes, I would love to hear a little bit more about the embryonic craniosacral work that you do, because that's something I've actually never heard of, and I would love to, I know craniosacral therapy, but not the embryonic practice. So I would love to hear more about that.
Mm. So the the studying I did around embryological development was with a wonderful woman called Alyssa Dell, who weaves both shamanic work and cranial work together. She's based here in London. And she was one of my tutors on my cranial training. And I just loved how she would look at things. I loved how she would pick up bones and that she would look at bones and she would say, look at every side of this bone in order to hear its story. So we look at bones and anatomy in books and we have the experience of our anatomy. And she was really picking up things and saying, look at this in this way. When we see it rock like this, look at this and see what happens when we look at this bone in this way. What happens? What changes? And so looking at embryological development with her was like looking at a landscape across and through the seasons. It was like looking and understanding embryological development through the felt sense. So she really showed and walked through like the physiological evolution of that we make as human beings from the moment that the sperm meets the egg allows and is ready to receive the sperm, because we know that the narrative of the sperm forcing its way through the shell of the egg is old, and we know that now the egg receives the sperm and the egg is, the time is right. And that development from there, what's fascinating and what was fascinating to me was that Alyssa really highlighted our similarity as organisms to all other life organisms and showed really beautiful. She really took us out of the realm of medical or purely physiological evolution and development, and really, as she was showing these slides of different phases of embryological development, she was inviting us to really feel the field. What was it that we were feeling as we were looking at these slides? And there was a moment where we were looking at the slide of a 10-week-old embryo. And this embryo was, this incredible photograph had been taken of this embryo. It's in, I have to find the name of the book so I can give it to you. And I remember looking at this embryo and feeling so alone. It really resonated for me, of feeling really alone. And there was something in this particular developmental point for me that felt really resonant in my system, like none of the other slides had. And that, we know through the field and the work of epigenetics how much of a download of information we receive through our maternal and paternal lines. We know that simple studies, studies that have been done on male rats show us that when male rats are in a crate and they are electrocuted and they are given the smell of cherry blossom, that they their rat babies will have a nervous system response to that cherry blossom smell, just to the smell. They will have the same response to the smell as they will show a nervous response. And so through studies like this, we know that we get we are receiving information as embryos all the time.
Yes.
And that information isn't just about the world around us and moving towards experiences that are safe or moving away from experiences that are threatening. But there is also the realm of relational experience that we are moving through, and the presence or absence of the system that we are within. And, you know, whether the person that's carrying us knows that we're there, at what stage they know we're there. And when they know that we're there, is it a shock? Are they afraid? Are they unsure? Do they want us? Are we wanted? You know, these stories are all really present for us. You know, in the work I do with my clients and the work I've done in my own body, these stories show up. You know, and they surprise me because I also have a very logical and mind. You know, these are still tangible. These stories are tangible in our tissues.
Mm-hmm.
And so the embryological, you know, the cranial kind of embryological work was really about looking at embryological development from both a physiological perspective and from a felt sense perspective, was also being aware of, how may I have come into the world as an embryo? How might that time have been? You know, what was in my environment toxin wise? You know, was the person that I was inside of, were they taking toxins into their bodies? Was there alcohol consumption? Was someone smoking? You know, all those things, they're really, you know, in the kind of cranial world of work, there's a real, you know, phenomena known as like, you know, we know what comes in through we don't have choice about what comes in through the umbilical cord. And if something's come in and arrived through that portal that we didn't want, there'll be something, not consciously, but there'll be something there in the system that didn't want that thing. So sometimes working in that realm, you might find yourself working with someone actually who wants to push something out of their body, or wants to get rid of something that's in their body that they didn't choose to be in there. So embryological work is really just inviting us into that territory of pre-birth, and bringing our awareness into that as practitioners, that it's a real time for us that we can work with, both when someone's pregnant, and both when someone's been born and is an adult in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps had quite a significant time while they were in utero still.
Yeah, I love that you bring this awareness to like the attunement of like our nervous systems with our womblings when they're in womb, like they're attuning to our nervous system, and they're literally like inside of us and attuning, you know, we are attuning them, and that carries forth like as they are outside of our bodies, and we help regulate their nervous systems. And also hearing you share about thinking back to the possibilities of an experience of us as embryos ourselves. And for me, that just took me back. I don't think I've shared about this on the podcast, but I, in my 20s, found out that I knew that I had been conceived on birth control, like that my mom wasn't intending to have me. But it was through my parents' divorce that then my mom was being a little bit cruel and telling some stories about how my dad actually didn't want me to be born at that time, that he, they had planned to have their two kids and they'd had their two, and then I was this one unexpected um soul that came through. And I've definitely had done some work myself around my own story medicine, and just recognizing some patterns in myself of like fear of abandonment or fear of not being wanted. And I feel like a lot of that can, like, I have a beautiful relationship with my dad now, but like there was this time where, yeah, I was able to recognize that some of that was coming from that time when I was like in my mom's womb, and that my, dad didn't necessarily want me in that moment in time. Now he's, glad that I'm here, but I was experiencing those feels through my dad, and also the stress of my mom having a partner that, was not supportive of my pregnancy in the beginning. And it's been really helpful for me to have that awareness and sort of untangling that, and that I am worthy and I am wanted. And um yeah, reflecting on those things as well.
Mm. Yes, we're still coming into relationship, I think, with, as a kind of body of work, um, in a more tangible way, that babies are really incredibly sentient and hold incredible knowing without without a connection to the verbal realm. And it's very easy for us to couple non-verbal beings with not being sentient or
Mm.
holding the capacity for the sense. Um, and really, all the work that I've done to date really has uncovered is quite how sentient we are, quite how receptive we are to the experiences we have. And of course, the experiences that one person will have, another person will have the same experience in the womb, and they will manifest or be felt in different ways. So I think it's just important to say we're still in an uncovering process about that. But I think if people are interested in more of the science realm, I think epigenetics is a great place to go to really see the evidence of the what we're finding out about what carries through both paternal and maternal lines.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I love how you also a little bit ago were speaking to how, like, being aware of birth and stories and witnessing other people's experience was also, like, for me too, it was a different tangible thing to go through my own process of birthing, and how that then kind of realigned my whole being as I experienced the birth and like the death of my maiden self, and walking into motherhood, and mm, being a mother and having a baby on the outside, and how that was a whole different experience of growth and learning, and um realigning things. And I don't even know if I fully have the language for it, but it just changed me, and gave me such a wider and deeper understanding of also the other women and mothers in my life, and the experience that they had gone through, even though each experience is so unique. And yet also we have some similar threads that follow through in our experiences as mothers.
Mm. Yeah, as you're talking, it just makes me think, how valuable spaces are that bring us together as community in order to witness birth, witness pregnancy, witness birth stories being told, and what that quite what a gift I think those stories are in many ways. I think the home birth group that we kind of look after here is such an example of that. It's such an example of, I went to that group, and the first story that I listened to, a woman told a story of giving birth in the bath, and really wonderful birth. And she bled a lot and ended up having a hemorrhage. And it's potentially kind of material that you might think would be quite strong material, maybe not a birth story you might choose to want to listen to or read about when you're pregnant. And actually, I just had the complete opposite experience. I just was listening to the story thinking, this is so wonderful to hear her tell it and hear her talk about what then took place and how she was supported and how she was cared for beautifully by the midwives that were
Mhm.
there, how she stayed at home, how she was taken care of, and how she fared through that time. And this isn't a commentary about what you should or shouldn't do with postpartum hemorrhage. This is about what I'm speaking about is how important it is to hear story and hear stories that give you a reference to experiences that statistics just give in a completely different way. When you listen to somebody else tell a story, you're feeling in your own system how that might be for you.
Mhm.
I was reading recently um, a, a piece of research, somebody talking about a piece of research um, undertaken at Princeton. I think it's a professor called Yuri Hassan. I'm going to have to get back to you on that name. Who talked about the exchange between a storyteller and a story listener, and that the story listener will, the brain waves in a story listener will sync up with the storyteller, and in accordance to the direction of the story. So there's a resonance, a somatic resonance according to the directions that the story goes through, whether it's a story about people coming together or a coming together or an ending or a beginning or a journey or a spiraling or a journey into the underworld. There is these different directions that stories hold. There is resonance between storyteller and story listener. And in that resonance, we have sense making. And so during pregnancy, there's this beautiful opportunity to sense make when you're gifted a birth story about what feels right for you and what doesn't feel right for you.
Mhm.
And I think that's where coming together as communities in pregnancy and the sharing of birth stories can be so precious.
Yes, you gave me chills as you spoke that, and I love how you call it the sense making. I haven't heard that term before, but I really like that language. Mm.
And also there's a layer too of the person coming back and telling their story, that their story really lives on through each and every person who hears it. This woman's story lives on through me. And I still have people who come to the group who heard my story, and my story lives on through them, and in some ways touched them and prepared them for birth in a way that a book may not.
Yes.
You hear you hear something that you don't get from reading a book when you're listening to someone speak. You hear and feel oxytocin come
Mhm.
together, and you're in a room with someone telling their birth story. You can feel the oxytocin in the space.
Yes, just the resonance of a person's voice and how that lands with a person can just make such a difference. I feel like just looking at someone is one, layer, and then hearing them speak feels such a tangible experience. Hmm. Well, I know we're coming to a close here. I wonder if there's anything else you would like to share before you tell everyone where they can find you, or
I think if the last thing that I might like to say, if anyone's listening who is pregnant or has a birth story, to know quite and in pregnancy to find stories of those who want to tell them, either be they on podcasts or be they ideally from humans that find stories and find stories from those who really are there just to tell the story rather than to say anything else about the story. Really that's the function, isn't it? Is the story of the story, not any advice or adjunct that comes along afterwards.
Mhm.
Um, because they're so powerful. And for those that are pregnant who and have given birth, for those who have given birth,
Mhm.
to who have stories that are potent, please share them. They need hearing. Very easy, I think, if you've had what you feel is a positive birth story or a story that just holds teaching in some way, to share them.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Excuse me. And please tell everyone where they can find you, your website, social media, anything else like that.
Yes. So my website is my name, emilycarson.co.uk, and my Instagram is Emily and Ruby. Ruby is the name of my dog.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't do other things. I write occasionally, and I work with people preparing for the postpartum time. And I do that online in the form of 9 months and 40 days, which is a 5 week kind of preparing for the postpartum time in a somatic way, and through birth stories as well, birth story listening.
Beautiful. So women can work with you all over the world.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and sharing today, sharing your energy, your voice, your stories. And yeah, thank you to everyone else who's tuning in today. If you love the podcast, I would be so grateful if you choose to subscribe, rate, or review. If you feel aligned with me and would like to dive deeper together, I offer virtual and in-person sistership support. You can book your free clarity call or learn more on my website, birthingnova.love. And I would love to connect with you. And until next time, be brave, be bold, be love, be you.